Hello, Rambam. How are you?
Good. Thank God. Thank God. Okay. A good Shabbos afternoon to everybody. Welcome.
You too.
We're going to be learning today a chapter of Rambam, which you could probably describe as one of the most influential post-temple principles of Jewish law, and that is the Jewish calendar. Whatever level of Judaism a person keeps, there is a Jewish calendar. And what defines that? So you've been learning for the last week, we've been learning all about the great mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the new moon, and how was that done? Through the two witnesses that come to the Sanhedrin. What about today? There's no Sanhedrin, there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no anything. What do we base all of our Jewish life on? What does the Jewish life revolve around? And the Rambam introduces us today to the concept of the modern day Jewish calendar, which he doesn't actually ascribe the author of it. There's a sage by the name of Hillel II, or Hillel HaKatan, not the Hillel you're all familiar with, the counter to Shammai. Hillel and Shammai, not the two great famous sages. This is a separate individual who devised with actuarial brilliance and unbelievable accuracy a calendar over 1,500 years ago, which still functions today. So we're going to take a look inside, and as always, if anybody has any questions, please do share them with us. Sorry. Okay. You see okay?
Yep.
Okay. Kiddush Chodesh Perek Hey Halacha Aleph, chapter 5, Halacha 1. Kol Mashar Marnu, all the statements made previously regarding the prerogative to sanctify the new month because of the sighting of the moon and to establish a leap year to reconcile the calendar, or because of a necessity, apply to the Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael, for it is they alone, or a court of judges possessing smicha that holds sessions in Eretz Yisrael and that was granted authority by the Sanhedrin, who may authorize these decisions. In other words, it's either the Sanhedrin or a direct body of judges who carry smicha in that regard. This concept is derived from the command given to Moshe and Aaron, this month shall be for you the first of months. And I'm sure you remember that, of course, this is the very first mitzvah in the Torah. Rashi, in the opening verse of Bereshis, of Genesis, says why he quotes Rabbi Yitzchak. Why don't we start from this verse if the Torah is a book of mitzvahs? The oral tradition has passed down teacher to student from Moshe, our teacher, throughout the generations, explain that the verse is interpreted as follows. What does it mean for you, the first of months? That this testimony, which sets the calendar, is entrusted to you and those sages who arise after you and who function in your position and by your authority. When, however, there is no Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael like today, we establish the monthly calendar and institute leap years solely according to the fixed calendar that is followed now. So we have an undisputed calendar of Jewish law. And what's amazing is that the Jewish people are masters at machloikas, at conflict. We argue about everything, especially in the post-Sanhedrin era. And nevertheless, the fundamental principles of the Jewish calendar remain untouched. There is absolutely no conflict about that up until today. This concept is a halacha communicated to Moshe on Mount Sinai, right? Meaning the part of the oral tradition given by God to man through Moshe there, which is When there is a Sanhedrin, the monthly calendar is established according to the sighting of the moon. And when there is no Sanhedrin, the monthly calendar is established according to the fixed calendar that we follow now. And the sighting of the moon is of no real consequence. In other words, whether the moon was sighted, wasn't sighted, irrelevant. When the fixed calendar is followed, there are times when the day established as a Shchedish will be the day on which the moon is sighted. In other words, the moon over Jerusalem. And there are times when the sighting will either precede or follow it by a day. It is, however, an extremely extraordinary phenomenon for the day established as Rosh Chodesh to be a day after the sighting of the moon, and this is possible only in the lands that are west of Eretz Yisrael, because obviously there the sighting of the moon could be later. Halacha Gimel. When did the entire Jewish people begin using this calendar? The Rambam here uses a somewhat cryptic term, doesn't give us a date, doesn't even actually give us a specific time, but it alludes to an era. He says as follows: at the conclusion of the Talmudic period, when Eretz Yisrael was in ruin and an established court no longer remained there, that's when it started. So at the end of the Talmudic era, in the era of the sages of the Mishnah, and in the era of the sages of the Gemara until the time of Abai and Rava, the people rely on the establishment of the calendar in Eretz Yisrael. And there's a debate now between the commentaries on the Rambam. What does he mean by this? In other words, during the times of the Talmud, right, when the primary center of Jewish life and learning was in Iraq, in Babylon, what does it mean that they relied on Eretz Yisrael? Does it mean that there was a Beis Din that had smicha from the Sanhedrin, that had their authority? Or, as we'll see in the later function, no, it was just an independent Beis Din. But as always, even until today, we rely on the people of Eretz Yisrael following their calendar, and we follow them. And that's a fascinating idea with wonderful implications, which we'll get to in a moment in Halacha Hey. Halacha Daled. 4. When the Sanhedrin functioned, and the calendar was established based on the sighting of the moon, the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael, and some of the inhabitants of all places where the messengers of Tishrei would arrive, would celebrate the holidays for one day only. The inhabitants of the distant places that were not reached by the messengers of Tishrei would celebrate 2 days because of the doubt involved. Obviously, this excludes Rosh Hashanah, which everyone did for 2 days. They did not know the day that the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael established as the beginning of the new month. In the present era, however, when the Sanhedrin no longer exists, and the court of Eretz Yisrael establishes the months according to the fixed calendar, according to the law, it will be appropriate for Jews throughout the world to celebrate the holidays for one day alone. For the inhabitants of the distant regions of the diaspora, the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael rely on the same fixed calendar and establish the festivals accordingly. Nevertheless, the sages ordained that the inhabitants of the diaspora retain the custom of their ancestors. In other words, in order to keep alive our memory of number one, the fact that there used to be a calendar that would rely on the moon, number one, and number two, that there was a difference between Eretz Yisrael and the diaspora, the Chachamim said, keep it going. Don't change. Therefore, make 2 days even today, like they did at the time. But the people of Eretz Yisrael do like they did. They never would have 2 days. What comes out from this is thus our celebration, the second day of the holidays in the diaspora at present, is a rabbinic institution. In other words, the Chachamim legislated it. It's not out of doubt that perhaps it is the original biblically intended day of the holiday. It is the takana that the Chachamim established. Any questions yet? All good. Okay.
Sorry, Rabbi, a quick question,
Yeah.
if I may. When in Shul, when we're blessing the new month on the Bima, we always announce the Molad, which is the time that the new moon would have been seen over Jerusalem. There's often at least 36 hours, possibly even a little bit more, between that and when we're celebrating Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah, but usually before. So what the Rambam is saying is that it's usually before.
Right, but what I mean, it's not just one day. It sometimes is longer than 24 hours.
Yeah. And the reason for that is that when the calendar was established, it was disconnected from where the moon would be at that time.
Ah, okay.
The calendar was established in order for maximum function and for many, many practical reasons. But it was not anymore based on the sighting of the moon. Meaning it's inherently a lunar calendar, the Jewish calendar, albeit aligned to the solar year.
Thank you.
Okay. Weiter. Yom Tiv Shel Rosh Hashanah. Even when the calendar was established based on the sighting of the moon, the majority of the inhabitants of Israel would establish Rosh Hashanah for 2 days because of the doubt involved. They would not know the day in which the court established the new month because the messengers would not depart on the holiday. Moreover, even in Yerushalayim, where the court would hold session, there were many times when the holiday of Rosh Hashanah was celebrated 2 days. For witnesses didn't arrive on the 30th day following Rosh Chodesh Elul, the day on which they had awaited the arrival of witnesses regarded as holy, and the following day would be regarded as holy. So since there were times when they would observe Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, even when they sanctified the months according to the sighting of the moon, our sages ordained that even the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael should always celebrate Rosh Hashanah for 2 days in the present era, when the holidays are established based on the fixed calendar. Thus, even the observance of the second day of Rosh Hashanah in the present era is a rabbinic ordinance. But it's one that's kept all over. And now the Chachamim gives a clarification how this impacts the laws of Yom Tif. Ein asiyas Yom Tif echad tli b'ktivas hamakom. The celebration of the holiday for 1 day or 2 days is not dependent on geographic distance alone. What do we mean? If a place is located within a 5-day or less journey from Yerushalayim, and thus it was truly possible for the messengers to reach them, we do not postulate that the inhabitants celebrate only 1 day. For we have no way of knowing whether or not the messengers of the high court would journey to this place. Perhaps the messengers didn't journey to this place because it wasn't populated by Jews at that time. And if it became populated by Jews after it became customary to establish the festivals, according to the fixed calendar, they would be obligated to celebrate 2 days. Alternatively, perhaps the messengers did not reach there because there was a blockade on the way, as existed between Yerushalayim and the Galilee during the time of the Mishnah. Or perhaps the Samaritans would profess that the Kusim would prevent, the messengers from passing through their journey. In fact, I should point out, today there are people, for example, in Eilat, which is obviously a part of the state of Israel, there are people in Eilat who keep 2 days Yom Tif, because it wasn't part of where necessarily the witnesses would come to. It's not a widespread custom, but it's important to keep in mind. If the matter were dependent on geographic distance alone, all the inhabitants of Egypt would observe the holidays for only 1 day, for it is possible for the messengers of Tishrei to reach them. The distance between Yerushalayim and Egypt via Ashkelon is a journey of 8 days or less. Similar concepts apply regarding the majority of Syria. One thus can conclude that the matter is not dependent solely on geographic distance. And the Rambam now summarizes, Nimtza iker davar zeh al derech zu kachu. Thus, the principles governing the matter can be summarized as follows. Whenever the distance between Yerushalayim and a particular place exceeds a 10-day journey, the inhabitants should observe the holidays for 2 days, as was their previous custom, for sure. For the messenger sent out for Tishrei cannot be guaranteed to reach places other than those within a 10-day journey from Yerushalayim. The following rules apply by contrast. When there are places where there are a 10-day journey or less from Yerushalayim, thus it's possible the messengers could have reached them. What's the rule? We see whether that place is located in the portions of Eretz Yisrael that were inhabited by Jews during the time the calendar was established on the basis of the sighting of the moon. During the second conquest of the land, and the examples are given, Usha, Shfaram, Luz, Yavne, Noiv, Tveria, and the like. The inhabitants of these places should celebrate only one day. If the place is part of Syria, now it can be opposite directions, different places, like Sur, Tyre, Damascus, Ashkelon, and the like. They should follow the custom of the ancestors. If the custom was to celebrate one day, they should do one day. And if the custom is 2 days, they should celebrate 2 days. When a place, Beis, Makim Shebeinai ben Yerushalayim, Asara Yamim Pachis Me'asara, a place located within a journey of 10 days or less, and is part of Syria, the diaspora. Okay, like Jordan, for example. Its inhabitants have no established custom conveyed from previous generations. They should celebrate 2 days, as is customary in the world at large. In other words, unless you know that this is a place that had a Jewish community that would receive messengers from Yerushalayim, you keep 2 days. The same rules apply to a city that was created in the desert of Eretz Yisrael, or a city first populated by Jews in the present era. So a city which was historically always Gentile, Jews, or didn't exist and it was only established today, they should keep 2 days. At present, the celebration of the second day of holiday is always a rabbinic institution. In other words, there is never a time that of any Yom Tiv that the second day is kept out of doubt of being a biblical holiday. It is always rabbinic. And this applies even to the establishment celebration of the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which is observed by all Jewish people in the present era. In other words, because the establishment of the calendar, because the establishment of the calendar is, by its very nature, a continuation of the mitzvah that was originally given, the establishment of the calendar can invest the authority of law, of biblical law, on the first day of Yom Tiv. And therefore, all second days are never out of doubt, but only out of rabbinic tradition. This applies in the celebration of the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which is observed by all Jewish people in the present era. Okay. And here, the Rambam writes something so beautiful. The calculations that we follow in the present era, every individual in his community, to a certain which is Rosh Chodesh, which is Rosh Hashanah, do not determine on the calendar, nor do we rely on these calculations. In other words, I think the question I've been getting the most in the last 2 weeks is, Rabbi, is Chabad publishing a calendar this year? Right? Because he didn't get it in the Chronicle for December. So first of all, don't worry. I'm sorry, this applies only to the Cape Townians who get their annual calendar from Chabad with the Jewish Chronicle. Sorry, Joburgers. But whether you're Cape Town and Joburg, we do not institute leap years or establish the monthly calendar diaspora. We rely on the calculation of the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael and their establishment of the calendar. It always comes out of Eretz Yisrael. Kimitzi and Tetzitera. This is a principle which the Rambam asserts very strongly in Halacha. The reason we make calculations is merely for the sake of information. In other words, not establishing the holiness. For we know that the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael rely on the same calendar, but inherently, it's the people of Eretz Yisrael that make the calendar for all of us. Thus, our calculations are intended to determine the day that the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael establish as Rosh Chodesh or a festival. What makes this Shabbos Mevarchim, and next Friday Rosh Chodesh, Thursday? The people of Eretz Yisrael. For it is the establishment of the calendar by the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael that establishes a day as Rosh Chodesh or a festival, not our calculations of the calendar. And with this, the Rambam concludes the chapter and leaves us with a remarkable truth. And that is that the Jewish people will always be in Eretz Yisrael. And had we ever left Eretz Yisrael, had there ever been a time that the Jewish people were not living in Eretz Yisrael, we would not have our holidays. And we all flow from that truth. Any questions?
Rabbi, a question, please.
Sure.
In fact, two questions. We're saying that our rabbinic law, if you're in the diaspora, then it's 2 days. What is defined then halachically as diaspora? Are we talking about Eretz Yisrael, and I'm not sure what those borders are? Obviously, we're not technically talking about the state of Israel. How do we distinguish? So if I'm a frum person living in Eilat, am I in diaspora for the purposes of this custom?
So the generally accepted practice is that the borders of Eretz Yisrael would follow the modern incarnation of it, if you could call it that. The question would be, for example, let's say somebody was living in Sharm el Sheikh, right? So 1965, he kept 2 days Yom Tov. 1969, 1 day Yom Tov. 1984, 3 days, 2 days Yom Tov again.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly what I was asking.
Yeah. So I would say that, for example, the Sinai Desert, which was never ever part of Eretz Yisrael, I don't think that people there ever kept 1 day. Eilat, which has had somewhat of a Jewish presence for a very, very long time, is always seen as, a part of the diaspora that has that tradition that it's continuing. And obviously, the West, the Yehuda and Shomron, the territories that were conquered in 1967, and not Gaza, but what's referred to as the West Bank, is primarily land that was part of it. Not primarily, it was all land that was part of Eretz Yisrael, so that would definitely be keeping 1 day. They're keeping 1 day more than Eilat, for sure. And your second question?
My second question, that you talked about the second conquest of the land.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Are we talking about when we returned from Babylon? We're talking Ezra, Nehemiah?
Yeah.
Is that what okay.
That's considered sort of the long-term Eretz Yisrael.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a great Shabbos. This is, of course, Shabbos Mevarchim. So if you want to write this down quickly before Shabbos starts so you have it for tomorrow. The Moiled, when you daven tomorrow, make sure to bless the new moon. The Moiled is Wednesday, 5:35, and 3 Chalakim. The Chodesh will be Thursday.
Sure. I have one of the calendars.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom to everybody.
Claire, Leanne, Martin, Dennis, Stephen, Brian, Jeff, John, Kent, David. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi.